Good evening. My name is Larry Cimino, and I'm the president of the Indiana Council on World Affairs. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce my fellow ICWA board member, Mr. Donald Cassell, who will be this evening's interlocutor and handle the structured interview. He in turn will introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Andreas Park. Donald Cassell is a volunteer member of our board of directors of the Indiana Council on World Affairs, and he's a senior fellow at the Sagamore Institute, an Indianapolis-based think tank, and he's director of the African program and Liberian initiatives there. He also oversaw the development of the Indiana Africa Connections Project, a database of over 250 Hoosier organizations with ties to Africa. Additionally, he serves as the host of Sagamore's Fellows Program. Previous to his role at Sagamore, Mr. Cassell spent 20 years working as an architect in Indianapolis. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects. A native of Liberia, Mr. Cassell graduated from Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. He also studied at Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Pittsburgh, where he received the Master of Divinity degree. He's just edited and published a new book entitled National Development as an Aesthetic Project, a policy collection, which is focused on the precarious situation in his West African homeland of Liberia. And it's available now on Amazon. Donald, I turn the program over to you to introduce Professor Park and to kick off the discussion.
Thank you so much, Larry. I really appreciate this. So we'll just plunge right into the introduction of Andrea Park, who is a professor of finance at the University of Toronto. Was appointed to the Rotman School of Management in the Department of Management at the University of Toronto. Mississauga, which is a really wonderful, I went to look at Mississauga a little bit and must say that I love what I saw there. In fact, looking at, researching it a little bit, I almost think that I should visit it one of these days. It's a very it seemed like a very lovely city, a good place to live. He currently serves as the research director at the FinHub, Rotman's Financial Innovation Lab, and he is the co-founder of the LedgerHub, the University of Toronto's blockchain research lab. He is a lab economist for the blockchain stream at the Creative Destruction Lab, the economic advisor to the Conflux Network, and the consultant to the Ontario Securities Commission and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada. Andrea also teaches courses on payment, innovation, decentralized finance, and financial market trading, and his current research focuses on the economic impact of technological transformation such as blockchain technology. He recently co-authored a design proposal for a Canadian central bank issued digital currency commissioned by the Bank of Canada. Andreas received his doctorate degree from the University of Cambridge. His work has been published in top journals in economics and finance, including Econometrica, the Journal of Finance and the Journal of Financial Economics, and the Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis. With that, it is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker this evening, Professor Andreas Park. Professor Park, would you like to set the stage for us this evening? I mean, we talked about it a little bit, we can go through the questions right away, but I was hoping you might be able to make some opening remarks, just giving us a structure where you think the program is about and where you think we're going this evening.
Well, thank you for having me first, and thank you for the lovely introduction, Donald. Just to be clear, anybody if you should feel comfortable addressing my first name, Andreas. Professor Park seems a little bit ostentatious, but thank you so much. So thank you for including me in your wonderful program. Hearing what you say that you do and what you aspire to do, this is a wonderful opportunity in particular for young people. And I think there could be nothing more important that young people seek to learn more about the world and find out and what they can contribute to the world. And so the many lovely initiatives that you have, I'm really glad to hear what you're engaged in. Now, you can see here next to me, this is always a little difficult because it's sort of the other way around. No, not there, there. Oh my God, I better not do that. You invited me to talk about cryptocurrencies, blockchain, decentralized finance. They're all connected topics, and I thought it would be useful if we, in our discussion, we can talk a little bit about just the vocabulary description of what is a blockchain, what role does a cryptocurrency play in a blockchain? Why do we care about decentralization? What's the merit of that? And then see how that applies to finance, and actually also for what's really to come maybe in the next 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of discussion on that. Recently today was an announcement by the New York Times, or an article by the New York Times about regulation of that space. The Economist is running a big story about this general development and how it fits in. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I hope I can help you contribute to your understanding. And I'm sure that we can all learn from one another on this one.
Thank you so much, Andreas. We really appreciate that little introduction. The first question that I have for you here, and as we go through these questions, I would like you to define some of these terms that you wanted to do as we work through the questions. And so the first question I have for you here is, what exactly is a blockchain?
So, this is very important to actually describe this early on. And the one thing I really would like you to take home from this talk is I would like to steer you away as far as possible from thinking of blockchain and Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies and all of that only through the lens of what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is an interesting innovation, and it certainly is, the genesis, if you want, of this space. But a blockchain is something more than that. And so very fundamentally, in the most basic sense, you should think about a blockchain as an infrastructure for digital resource transfer. Usually we think about, you think of the internet. The internet effectively is a technology for the transmission of information. As Larry said this so nicely early on, there is an infinite amount of information on the internet, and an ever increasing amount of information and misinformation on the internet. And the equivalent of a blockchain is, if you want, is the internet of value, or of resources, digital resources, of course. So now, why is this important? Well, it is important because if you think of the way how we transfer value today, it's not fundamentally different from how we transfer value in the 1950s. And in some cases, you can go even further back. So, much of the information now is in databases, but these databases are usually disjoint, and we're basically jerry-rigging them together for transfers of value in a very awkward manner. We live in a different world now than in the 1950s. We live in a global world. We live in a world with global commerce, with global companies, and at the same time, the way how we, for instance, purchase a stock, the process that is involved is unbelievably cumbersome. Now, a blockchain essentially would be a possibility to simplify all of these transfers, remove frictions, make it faster, and in particular, make it cheaper. But there's more. One of the things that I think is the most remarkable part about blockchain technology is that it is a technology which is accessible to anybody. So you don't need to beg a financial institution to give you a bank account to be able to use it. You don't need to be lucky enough to be grown up and born in a country where you have a stable government and a stable financial system to access basic financial services. Anybody can use this technology and use the assets and trade the assets and create value using that technology.
Okay, Andrea, I was still concerned about it. I really would, one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of simplifying this further, and you can correct me if you heard about this or clarify it for me. Looking at this as we're preparing to meet with you, I came across a documentary that dealt with some Pacific Islanders of Yap. I don't know whether you've come across that, basically using stone money and whatnot. And it was a peculiar way, in the way how everybody had the knowledge of who owned the stone, the historical records of the stone and whatnot. And after that was explained, I think I got a grasp of it, because the impression I get from some of the other people that I read, even this amongst experts, getting a grasp of blockchain can be difficult. What do you think about that example? Would you say that that is a good example, and could you expand on it a little bit more?
Well, I think you're referring to the very gigantic ton-heavy stones that they use as money on the island of Yap.
Yes, indeed.
Now, if you go back to, if I could set that aside for a moment, one reason, for instance, why we use and like gold as a means of payment, or used to like it, was because it had great physical structures, right? So it was very difficult to forge. It was very difficult to change. It was very hard, so it didn't really react to heat or cold, and that made it also possible to transport it. Now, the important part about gold was that you had trust that the item is what the item is, right? Now with the island of Yap and the stone, there's a similar idea behind it, which is it is an item which is very difficult to forge. And so therefore, when you have ownership of that item, you can agree to what it is. And you can also agree who the owner is. Now, what a blockchain is it obviously lives in the digital world. And the idea of a blockchain is that you have the ability to register ownership and to transfer ownership in a digital space without the need for a trusted intermediary, like a bank, for instance. Now, a bank can certify that you have money in your account, but the idea of digital money is to have a financial system without an intermediary. So what that really means is that you need a network of computers that can agree to a state of, if you want, a database, number one, and number two, that they can also agree on a change in the database. So that means a transfer of the database in such a way that there is consensus about it, so that they all agree that something has happened. Now, this is a pretty difficult problem to solve, actually. So normally when you have a database and you make, and even a distributed database, so it's a network of computers, there's usually an authority that has the power to make a change. And there is a particular mechanism that determines whether or not that somebody has the power to change. And the idea of in particular, it started with Bitcoin, but generally of digital money, is that you don't need the central authority to do this. Now, I rather not go into the details of how the Bitcoin network accomplished it. Let me just say this, yes, is they very cleverly put together two pieces of technology. So in some sense, they didn't invent anything that wasn't there already. And this is actually important, that they didn't invent something that wasn't there, but they put two inventions together. And the two inventions that they used is the idea of a blockchain and the idea of what's called the proof of work protocol. Now, blockchain has been used for timestamp servers. And so basically the idea in a timestamp server is when you have a distributed network, you need to keep track of what happened at what time. So, for instance, when you have, you all use probably, well, some of you may use cloud storage in a Dropbox, and you may use it on a desktop and on a laptop. And so when you make a change, you need to have some timestamp of what happens when, so that you can order events and make sure that which change is valid. And so the way this works in a blockchain, in a timestamp blockchain, it's just you take information that happens at a time, you generate a digest, which is a unique piece of data of fixed length that identifies the data such as it is, and you link that to the next event. And so it is part of the information that the next event has, and you go on and on and on like this. And so the critical part about that is that when you want to change anything in the past, you would notice that that is not compatible with things that you have thought would have occurred afterwards. Okay. So that the network knows this is something which is invalid, so that there's an ordering of events.
Okay, and they create.
That is not. I should just there's one more thing, because I should say this is not enough for a blockchain to work, for digital money to work. For digital money to work, you need actually also, the ability to not forge or create an alternative history of things. Now, this gets really iffy if I wanted to explain that. But the important part is there's two pieces that are put together that make it work.
Well, it's good to know that the idea is old in some respect. And I think if we allow that at least that kind of concept existed with those ancient Pacific Islanders, then it tells us that the idea is really very old, that we are not the first people. We have definitely modernized it, but it is an old idea. The next question we go to, which is really close to this, and I think you had begun to touch on it a little bit, is that you seem to have hinted that it's not only for cryptocurrencies. The blockchain may not be used only for cryptocurrencies. So what else can it be used for? Why do you think, what need might it meet besides cryptocurrencies?
This is a great question. I think this is kind of the core of what I wanted to go at with you. So Bitcoin was the first iteration, if you want, an application of decentralized money on a blockchain. And now if you go back to what I said earlier, it's a network of computers that can agree on a change having happened. Now, when a computer agrees for something happens, all that they did effectively is execute a piece of code. Now, in the Bitcoin blockchain, the piece of code that is executed is very simple. Send Bitcoin from one address to another address, and that's it, or account if you want. So it's very primitive. Now, there was a young kid by the name of Vitalik Buterin from Toronto, actually, of all places, and he thought, you know, if we can execute this small piece of code, can we not execute any code? And so that led to the idea of the Ethereum blockchain, which is effectively a network of computers that can execute any code or anything that can be put into code, which is therefore is what's referred to as Turing complete. So now what does that mean? It means that this network is not for the transfer of money per se, but it is a network of guaranteed execution of some code having happened. So you can use this to verify digital identities. You can use this to run an auction. You can use this to have escrow contracts, for instance. You can use this for trading of assets. But very importantly, you can use this for the storage of any and value attribution for anything that is digital and digitally identifiable. And so there's, you know, the possibilities. I'm not a technologist. I can't think of all the applications that are there, but certainly in the financial space, if you look at how financial contracts are structured and how they work, there is a lot of possibilities out there in using this infrastructure. So the guaranteed execution of code with the abilities to store value.
I heard also that it might be used for the storage of medical records and other kinds of records that the state interaction with individuals and communities, etc. Do you know anything? I know your area is basically in finance, but have you encountered anything like that to show how vast this thing can also go beyond the financial, beyond property? It can even, in fact, I even heard that what intrigued me particularly about it is that we have lots of problems in Africa with property titles, and they said that a blockchain could in fact help considerably with property titles and things like that.
Oh, for sure. Now, you have to first, so there's one tricky part about this, which is if you want to use it for property titles, you first need to find a way how to link the digital world with the non-digital world. So if you have, say, an African country where there are problems with the attribution of ownership,
yes,
you would need to find a legal mechanism to say, here's our given database as it is today, and we're now putting the attribution onto a blockchain. But once you have it on there, all the transfers that are possible of property in any form would be recorded on the blockchain, and only the person who is the owner of a particular item would have the ability to make the transfer. So why is this useful? Well, it's useful in the context of corruption, right? Because what a corrupt politician or civil servant does is they change the entries in the property database without the knowledge of the person who actually owns the property, and then give it to somebody else. And when somebody wants to dispute the fact that something has been taken from them, there is no record and no way for them to prove that they actually were the original owner of it. And so, of course, with such a technology, that is not a problem, right? Because
yes,
on the blockchain, there's a unique way to see how transfers work.
Yes.
You can use it for forms of verification, and in fact, I know that there's a blockchain project in Germany that it's called Blocksberg, Um, if you know a little bit about German culture, it's actually also the name of a very popular comic character or children's comic character. But they actually found a way how you could take vaccination records and store them and have a way how you can verify that somebody is vaccinated that way. Now, it's important to understand that what is stored there would not be something that is personally identifiable, right? Because we don't want to have any of that, right? So you don't want to see your you don't want your medical history on the blockchain. What you do want, though, is a version of, you want to have a verification mechanism to show that, you are who you are, or there is a particular way how to identify that something is your record. So you can take a digital digest of your vaccination record that is not attributed to you, but that would prove that you have it and store that on a blockchain. This is a possibility for sure. And it goes further than to digital identity of some form. Now, we're far away from having a digital identity as such, a digital identity solution on the blockchain, because there's lots of, there's lots of problems to solve there. But, this is, of course, the next step.
Okay. Now, going on to the next point here was something called NFTs. And I have to start a little bit with a small introduction here. We have a good friend, and she put together a video and sang. It's all in Mandarin and all that, but did a very good job at it. She is actually a musician, and I was quite impressed with it. And then I went ahead and wrote there, maybe you need to make an NFT of it, a non-fungible token. And I'm not sure that I understood exactly what that meant, except that I had just read about it in preparations to meet with you and heard about models taking pictures of themselves and making that a non-fungible item and whatnot. And so what I was wondering is that how is it that the blockchain is used to create NFT, non-fungible tokens? And if you can explain that first to us and then go into how the blockchain is used to make non-fungible tokens, that would be very good.
Yeah, so let me give it a shot. It's not entirely trivial, but the idea is actually not that hard. You can take a digital item such as a song or a digital picture, and all that it really is, it's something that can be described as data, right? So now that data can be condensed into a particular a form, right? So you can take this as metadata, condense it in something which is of manageable size. And then what you do is this piece of manageable size, which uniquely identify the original item, you put this you wrap this, if you want, into a database entry. And that database entry would be uniquely attributed to a particular owner. This would be, think about it as an account. And with that, you have created an NFT. So I'm not sure if that is actually a relatively straightforward process. It's been around in the blockchain world actually for a while as a concept and as something that you could do. But it really took off, of course, only early in this year when artists started to using it. And there's the artist Deeply, who sold something for the equivalent amount of $1 million, which is pretty stunning.
Yes, that's what I thought my friend would do. And maybe because I thought her stuff was really good art production, and she could do something like that and sell it to whoever wants to buy it, I guess.
Let's be clear. So the item itself can still be copied, right? So if she has a song, she puts it on YouTube, other people can see it. You can imagine that at some point in the future, you will find technologies such that you can only play a particular piece of music or read a book if you have actually attribution of ownership. And then there would also be a way how you can sell potentially these pieces of music in the future to other outside parties.
That's what I was curious about. If it can still be copied on the internet and whatnot, then what is this special thing? What does this thing do?
That's a good question. It's legally not even clear what you own at this point, right?
Yes.
It's a little bit like, obviously, the Mona Lisa is a nice picture, and there's not millions, but probably thousands of copies of the Mona Lisa out there, right? And so if you are the original owner, there's certain value attributed to that, people generally speaking. But nothing prevents the original item that he used to put into the NFT, that's basically the foundation of the metadata, to be used for anything else.
I see.
Now, I would imagine that somebody at some point will come up with a solution to say, look, if you want to have this particular item, so think of a record, for instance, right? And so like an album for a musician. I think this time has passed, but let's just take this as an example.
Okay.
You create a certain number of these records. They will be in circulation, and there will be a technology that this particular music format that is used can only be played if you also have bought the underlying token. And so then you need to use, essentially, you need to prove that you are the owner for this every time you want to listen to that piece of music. I mean, obviously this has to be done in a seamless way and so on, but you can picture that somebody could develop something like this to be used.
Well, that would be very good for the artists. I did have another question concerning the security of blockchain, but I'll keep that until the end of our series of structural questions here. So I want us to now go and look at cryptocurrencies, if you don't mind.
If I mind, if I actually go back to something else for 1 second.
No, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you want to talk about this later, but we wanted to talk about also the digital future, generally speaking. And I think talking about NFTs and digital ownership is actually a good point to just talk about that for 1 second.
All right, go ahead.
So, one of the things that is a big topic that we'll see over the next few years, and it's already, over the news for the last month or so, is the concept of what's called the metaverse, which is the amalgamation of the digital world and the real world. I think, Donald, you may want to talk about that later for a little bit, but just for one moment, think about it this way.
Yeah.
You will be, there's in some format or another, you will be living a digital life, and you will build a digital identity. Think about this in the business world, where you find a way how you digitally interact with people. You have, you know who you are, you have business connections, you make deals, you create a reputation of some form. And this will be linked to your digital self. Now, you want to be the owner of that digital self. And in a very condensed form, an NFT, maybe not exactly in the form as we describe it now, but in principle, this NFT would be linked uniquely to you, and you would be the owner of that. Now, if you think of a digital world going forward, for instance, if you do it in a professional environment where you work for a firm and you change jobs, you want to move to a different firm, it will be absolutely critical for you that you keep ownership of your own digital identity and your digital self. And depending on how these digital worlds are constructed and what the relationship to the firm that operates in this digital environment is with you, it is not guaranteed, if there is no proper ownership structure and property rights, if you move firms, that you can take your digital self with you, right? Just think about the current world. I'm not a big fan of the man, but Donald Trump got censured by Twitter. Essentially, his digital identity at Twitter was taken away from him. And that's something which, think about it what you want, but this is very scary when you work in a professional environment, that your digital self can be taken from you. And an NFT could be a way how you can maintain ownership of what you are digitally.
Okay. All right. Well, again, like I said, I do want us to go to block at some point to talk about the security of blockchain. I do not want us to do that now, because I want us to explore a little bit more about cryptocurrencies. And then once we deal with some of these new things and the advantages, then we can come back and look at security and some of the other issues associated with it. So I was wondering here concerning cryptocurrencies, if you could tell us what they are. I mean, is it money as we know it, or is this still an aspiration? The studies that I've done in making some preparations for this would give me the impression that it may not as yet be money as we know it, though this is an aspiration. What's your take on that? And I keep asking these questions, our audience, because this is really sort of an informational session. These are questions that I've always had. I'm not an expert in this, and Andreas is, and so we come here together to ask him these questions and get his take on it. So Andreas, can you answer that question for us?
Yeah, let me actually take a bigger view on this one. So clearly,
Okay.
the idea of Bitcoin was to create digital money, and in some sense created out of thin air. And I have to be very honest with you. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin. It's not clear to me that what the value of it is as such. I just want to be very honest about this. So instead, I would like to explain to you maybe what some of the cryptocurrencies are that actually, in my opinion, actually do have intrinsic value, because I think that may be easier to explain than
Yes.
something which is kind of just a digital sticker in some form. So the Ethereum network, as I said earlier, is essentially a network which provides the guaranteed execution of code. Now, one problem with providing guaranteed execution of code is if you try to ask a network to execute some code, which, an arbitrary piece of code, you can easily write 4 lines of code of a particular program which runs infinitely. And when you have a network of computers that executes that code, then basically it would crash the network because it would run this code infinitely and absorb infinite resources. So the solution is that you have to pay for the execution of each computational cycle. And the internal payment mechanism, that is really what the core function of a cryptocurrency in almost all cryptocurrency networks are, except for something like Bitcoin or whatever else we have, like Dogecoin, Litecoin, all of those very early blockchains. So, something like Ethereum, Solana, whatever they're called, they all use an internal payment mechanism to ensure that computations cannot run infinitely. And then when you think about what that is, then all of a sudden a cryptocurrency makes a lot more sense, because it is an item that you use, it's a token if you want, to receive a service, which is the execution of the code. Maybe that is a better way how to think about a cryptocurrency. And now we can forget about digital stickers or Bitcoin.
Yes, and that's. But even with Ethereum, the impression sometimes I get, it almost reminds me more like they're talking about it being a platform where you have this network and you do all of these exchanges. It's not. We're still not. I mean, what I'm trying to get you to say or to explain to us is that really, even with Ethereum, we don't have money as we know it.
Yeah, but okay, so this is, I don't want to go and say that that Ethereum or the cryptocurrency that powers Ethereum is a new type of money, because I don't think that's what it is. And I think this is also a misunderstanding. What you receive, Ethereum is a platform for the guaranteed execution of code. So it is essentially, it's an operating system for a particular process. And you have to pay for that service. It's not free. Now, the way it's set up, you could imagine that you would set it up paying in US dollars to do it. But the tricky part about that one would be you need to bring US dollars to that network to flow on that network. There is no intrinsic mechanism for that. And if you want to do this, it will make it rather complicated. And what the creators of Ethereum try to do is to create something which does not require the outside world with outside money to come in, that you need an office when you need to exchange something for that money. Instead, they have an internal network where the operation of the network is powered entirely by what is already existing on this blockchain, aka its own cryptocurrency.
Okay, so to try to get our audience to understand and me to understand, on that network, if I were to make a transaction, can I legitimately make a purchase of a house or car on that network that I would be able eventually to go to a dealer or to a real estate agent and actually get my house or my car because I have made that purchase on that network?
Only if there is a legal mechanism to say that a particular item, your house or your car, like with its VIN number, is represented by a digital item on that network. To date, we don't have that. We don't have that technology. Now, you could imagine, and I think this is the next step, that you could be a firm that issues its shares. I mean, anybody can form a corporation, right? And in your corporation, you have to make shares, right? So if you do this for yourself for the first time, I have my shares printed behind me in this filing cabinet, because apparently this is one of the requirements that you have to do. You could also attribute them directly in your charter with a particular token. I mean, maybe that I'm not a lawyer if that's legally possible, but you can envision that that's something that you can say that everything will be determined by this digital item as I've created it. But to date, I don't think there's a legal mechanism to do this for existing items.
Okay, all right. Well, that is indeed one of the struggles that some of the more informed observers see of the entire digital platform is its connection with the real world that we move in. So, but we can come back and look at that later on. There was something else that I wanted to talk about that I think may be less opaque and more open for myself and our audience to understand. And one of the things that I was curious about is that the rather mysterious beginning of these things. I mean, you read about a figure, what is his name? Satoshi Nakamoto, who no one seemed to know. He wrote a white paper, he got the Bitcoin going, the whole stuff moving. I keep wondering why all this mystery, why the cinnamon? I mean, shouldn't this, what's going on? Why do we have these kinds of mysteries surrounding this thing? Or do you not know?
I honestly don't know. I don't think anybody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Clearly he wrote something. It's a really clever piece that he wrote. And you should see it in its context of its time, right? He wrote it in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. There was a lot of outrage all over the world for, government bailouts of banks. And there was, a significant portion of the population was concerned about hyperinflation created by new money being printed and so on and so forth. And so, whoever that was, it could be a man, could be a woman, could be a group of people, they came up with the idea of, hey, maybe we can get a better money going. And then say, well, digital money, the idea to create digital money has been around before. There was a concept called DigiCash, but it failed because it couldn't solve a particular technological problem. Bitcoin could, right? But it essentially the idea of the Bitcoin blockchain of the peer-to-peer money was just a white paper. It's just, hey, we could do X. And then some people came, oh, well, we could actually do this. And, they developed a mechanism, the network, the technology that is actually needed to operate it, all the little details to do it. Whether or not Satoshi Nakamoto exists is unknown. There is a Bitcoin address, which has now a paper value, if you want, of several $billion worth of Bitcoin in it. And it has not been touched ever. So, if the person existed as somebody who's not the pseudonym, it would be unfathomable that the person has that kind of wealth and never used it for anything. But,
okay. I guess I'm a bit concerned because I want to give our audience some time here. We get into a point where I would probably soon need to give them that time, but I still want to spend some time with cryptocurrency here. I guess one of the things that may be of concern to people is the mining, but I don't know whether to go there. The main thing I think will be of importance right now is why are major banks getting involved in this? They are now, you have been yourself associated with the Bank of Canada in trying to develop a digital currency. Why do banks want to be a part of this? Isn't that very different than the vaunted thing that they keep talking about? It's the decentralized finance, but you're trying to get banks involved, banks that the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the people in China, then it is no longer this utopia of decentralized finance.
So there's two things one has to differentiate, right? There's the question of what commercial banks, why they are interested in it. And there the answer is quite simply that there are certain needs that customers of theirs have, and they're just trying to serve these needs. And the involvement of the commercial banks are actually quite limited. So, some custody of assets and all that. There's a longer description what that actually means. There's some exchange traded funds that have been developed and so on and so forth. And that's really mostly for tax reasons, so people can put it into their retirement portfolio. Okay. Now, the other question that you're asking is the one about central banks. And I think there it's important to understand a little bit about the evolution here. So as a starting point, I should say, and to the Bank of Canada's credit, this is the Canadian Central Bank, when Ethereum had its first meetups early on in, let's say in early 2000 and was it in 2014, 2012, 13, the staff from the Bank of Canada, the tech staff, was actually present at these early meetings, right? So they actually had already a view on, and they try to be in the mix of that. And central banks actually are quite interested in anything relating to money. So let's say that's an important part. Now, the evolution essentially of this space was as follows. We start by Bitcoin. Bitcoin can only transfer digital stickers. On came the Ethereum network, which is a general computational infrastructure. Now, I think the core moment that got central banks really interested in this or really worried about this was when Facebook came out and said, hey,
Yes.
we're going to build our own digital infrastructure. And then all of a sudden, central banks, policymakers and all go, oh my God, what's going to happen here? Now, here's why this is important. Facebook obviously came out also with a bang and said, not only are we going to build a new financial infrastructure, we're also going to use our own form of money of this. And then you think Facebook has 2.5 billion users in the world. Yeah. This could actually be some new thing, which would mean that there is money flowing. There's a parallel payment system with a parallel financial system that central banks, policymakers, nobody has any say on. And you have a private company or consortium of private companies that all of a sudden runs some major systemically important financial infrastructure. And you can see how badly that could go wrong. I mean, there's literally so many ways how you can see that going wrong, right? So if you have, say, countries, there's many countries in the world, maybe this is not something which America should, would be highly accepted immediately, but there's many countries in the world that have money that's not worth the paper that is printed on. And if they could get their hands on digital US dollar, this would be a blessing for them. But at the same time, what happens if Facebook fails, right? Or if the system fails and the money gets lost because they just did a poor job doing it? Then you have riots in the street. You can have civil war coming from this. I'm not kidding. Yes. This is a really big issue. Yes. You also would all of a sudden, Facebook has international reach. You would have an international way how money would be floating through a system, again, completely without the usual controls and influence in particular that central banks have and that political and geopolitical powers have. So this was was an extreme wake-up call of what this space actually could enable and facilitate. And so then central banks started to go into hyper mode and say, okay, so maybe we should actually look into this. Maybe, if you take a step back, you say, well, we're getting increasingly digitized. Do our citizens actually all have access to the digital economy? The answer to that is actually no, right? Because if you want to participate in digital commerce, you need a credit card. And how many people, even in the US, have actually access to a credit card? Now, 15% of people in the US don't have access to a bank account. And then people have, they have balances on their credit card. So, you can take your cash and pay in the physical economy, but you can't do that in the digital economy. There's a lot of people left behind with this. Same in Canada. We have a much lower portion of unbanked people, but the number of people that have legitimately access to the digital economy is small. So maybe that's something we should have. Maybe that we should say that citizens should have the right to participate in the digital economy without the need for commercially interested third parties, such as the bank, paytech firm, or whatever. So there's been this entire development going on. Different jurisdictions have different problems, right? The Chinese have, the extreme power shift of data and payments to WeChat and Alipay, two private companies. The European Union has problems such as facilitating transfers between countries, or actually European citizens having the ability to pay with electronic money going from one country to another is still not there, even though these countries are part of the European Monetary Union. So they're trying to solve that problem. But first and foremost, the wake-up call that was created by Facebook is humongous. Now, I do want to say this, and this is something which I think people need to recognize, is it is more than just money. It's about a financial infrastructure. It is bringing essentially financial assets and financial interactions out of the silos and into a common sphere where you can provide financial services without the need of somebody who sits at the top of the silo and controls who gets in and out and who can do what. This is a really, there's really big efficiency gains to be had from a proper organized financial infrastructure that we currently don't have and nobody wants to do.
Yes, that's a very good in terms of the efficiency gains. Again, I do not want to focus just yet on the downside. Some of our audience may have some of the downside to consider. So you do get the upside of that is the efficiency gain, but you get the downside where there's then you have the government and the large corporation knowing you completely.
Absolutely. No, the downside is humongous on so many different levels.
Yes.
Right?
So, but the last point I want us to go, because I do want to quit here at about 8 o'clock to allow time for our audience to ask questions. So the last thing we need to focus on, which we talked about a little bit, was decentralized finance. DeFi is how they call it. What is it? The way the economists refer to it is that it's an experimental world of decentralized finance, and this is where the strange world of the metaverse, and I think one of my notes here says they refer to it as the Wild West of decentralized finance. So can you tell us a little bit, you teach a course on that in a way that we can understand what it is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the definition here right next to me, again on the other side.
That's very good. Everybody can see the definition that he has there.
So it is the provision of financial services without the necessary involvement of a traditional intermediary using blockchain technology, right? So it's a mouthful, but it's actually quite easy. It's basically the idea of using the blockchain as a resource, digital resource transfer infrastructure to facilitate financial services. There's many examples that you can have. So decentralized trading. So there's a lot of different applications of basic financial functions that could be provided by a network, right? So simplest example is trading. Currently trade, when you want to do, if you think of asset trading, it's an enormously cumbersome process, takes forever to do and is really costly to do. Decentralized finance can essentially is the idea of you can trade using the guaranteed code execution technology, sometimes called also smart contracts of the blockchain, to simply facilitate the transactions, right? So to trades of financial assets. And just to give you a picture, so I'll give you a few numbers here. In the second quarter of 2021, the Ethereum blockchain processed about $2.5 trillion worth of value as transfers. Now, this is not for payments. Just want to be very clear. This is financial transactions usually of some kind, because people don't use Ethereum to pay yet, or all the tokens that live on it. That's the same amount of value that was processed by Visa worldwide, right? It's about a sixth of what NASDAQ processed in trades. Now, there are cryptocurrency exchanges. For instance, Coinbase is one, went recently public. It's a $50 billion company these days. The decentralized trading venues together have more volume than Coinbase on a day-to-day basis. And that's a $50 billion company. Now, importantly, the fundamental core technology that they use is a piece of code that runs on the Ethereum blockchain that is 200 lines long, right? So $50 billion company, 200 lines of code. Think about it that way, right? Now, the idea is actually quite simple. So it's quite beautiful, because what you do is you use the ability of this common infrastructure, of this common resource, for people to join, say, in trading. Liquidity is a critical component. So you allow people to pool their assets together and thereby create a much more efficient trading and exchange mechanism. The same could hold for loans. Loans can be pooled, the resources can be pooled to provide an asset pool where people can trade against, or rather borrow from, under a given set of conditions. Now, this is not entirely the same as banks, because banks do balance sheet lending, so they generally create new money, right? That's something which you can't do on the blockchain. But in terms of collateralized lending, this is precisely what we actually have in much of the financial industry already, and it's done extremely efficiently. So, basic functions of the financial markets: borrowing, lending, collateralized borrowing, I should say, not balance sheet. So that means new money creation, what banks typically do, lending, trading, derivatives, all of that can be done extremely efficiently on the blockchain. And it's already happening. Now, why is it the Wild West? Well, it's the Wild West because, people come up with new ideas all the time. Things are fluctuating around like crazy. And, there's no regulator that looks at it. Now, I want everybody to be clear I want to contrast basically the regulatory process for 1 second with what happens on the blockchain, just so we're clear. There's always the idea of absence of regulation is often equated to fraud and scams and all that. And there's plenty of that. But just so you get the picture, if you wanted to say, I know the Canadian perspectives here, right? So if you wanted to establish a new trading venue in, say, a country like Canada, that is a process which costs you several $1 million worth of legal fees, and it will take you at least a year to do. And just if you want to change an order type, that takes months to do. Now, on the blockchain, there's a very famous, or the biggest decentralized exchange called Uniswap. They went, they took off sort of mid last year with their version 1. They realized it doesn't really work so well, so we're going to do a version 2. They did a version 2 later in the year. And they said, oh, we can actually do better than that. And they had version 3 coming out early this year. Now, if you wanted to go through the regulatory process to get through all of these different changes that they make, this would have taken 5 years to do, would have cost millions of dollars that they don't have in the first place. And we wouldn't have all of this innovation and actually all of these clever ideas coming out. These ideas, I guarantee you, will determine, even if this blockchain Ethereum never takes off, but these ideas that are created there, they will be with us. They will be used with central bank digital currency networks, even with the DM, Facebook network, whatever network will come next. All these ideas are going to percolate there through. So, and the fact that there's no regulator, the fact that it is the Wild West is precisely what is necessary for this to actually come to fruition, in my opinion.
All right. Well, I waiting here. I think I have about 22 messages. And so we have many questions from our audience, and we'll see if we can get through them as much as we can. We have, it's 8:03 right now, and by 8:25, I need to turn this back to Larry. So one of the questions here, I think I got from Bruce. Why do you think a country's central bank will allow a third-party currency that it has no control over function within a country's economy, thereby preventing the central bank from being able to manage the currency level with that level of economic activity in that country? Do you not think they will try to stop that? I guess is what he's getting at.
Okay, so we have to be a little, so let's take a step back from the blockchain world and just look into normal payments, right? And let's take some examples from around the world. Actually, let's go straight to China because it's a really good example. In China, most payments are processed by Alipay and WeChat Pay. Now, the way they do this is they have apps, phone applications that essentially work like digital wallets, and then they allow you to transfer money back and forth using their internal system. Right now, the money, there's no new money created for this, right? So it is money that sits actually in some account, but the processing of the payments runs entirely through WeChat Pay. Right now, this is a private firm. That could happen in other countries too, right? It happened actually in India, if you want, with Paytm. You would hope that something like this would actually also emerge in a country like the US. I mean, you have Venmo here, right? I'm not exactly sure how Venmo works, to be honest, but my understanding would be that it is also a lot of transfers of funds would happen not between banks, but within its own internal system, right? So, in other words, why is this important? It's important because the payment system as it is actually extremely inefficient. It's slow, it's expensive. It's under the control of central banks, of course, but you could very well argue that it by no means serves the population and the people in general, right? So, I can go on a rant a little bit about payments here. I can just tell you, so from Canada, in Canada, the payment system accounts for revenues created, and this is really just from shifting digital bytes around between banks, of more money, more income than the agricultural sector. And Canada is big and has a lot of agriculture. And somebody has to explain to me why that creates so much value, right? So why that is warranted. It isn't. It's rent extraction. So this is actually money that leaves people's. Some of this, of course, it's not trivial and all that. It's fraud protection and all that. But most of this money is coming out of people's pockets, and especially of merchants' pockets, and it shouldn't. And in fact, it's like redistribution of poor people, from poor people to rich people. This is the worst part about this. And please don't take me for a progressive, communist, but once you look into this, it's actually pretty scary. Now, when you think of what Facebook does, and let's take away the possibility of what Facebook is and why we may not like it and so on and so forth. But the idea is actually extremely powerful. And you have the same problem, by the way, in the US as we have in Canada with payments and the cost of it. It enables people to make cheap transfers of money and of value of any form without having to go through the banking system, without having to go through the central bank. Now, I also would like to ask a counter question. So I never voted for the central bank governor or for what do you call the board?
The chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Chairman of the Federal Reserve. I never voted for him. Did you? And look how much power this person has. I didn't vote for the regulators. I voted, you vote for congressmen and senators to make laws. But, most of your laws and are made by regulators these days. They're given great leeway to write the rules. But given that how essential for your own economic activity, the central bank actually is by having control over the money supply, it is remarkable that, that there is, that they can determine so much of your life without being elected officials. It's crazy, right? No, I'm not suggesting that they should be elected. By no means, that would be another catastrophe coming. But what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, the purpose of the financial sector is to serve the people. The banks have a single purpose, which is to enable economic activity. They have no purpose of their own. And so if you want to, so the mere fact that you have to give up control is not good enough to say, maybe not having control over it is not going to be a problem, right? I'm trying to be a little provocative on this one, but yes, you know what I'm saying, right? So if you believe in freedom and people having freedom, why is it that you want to give power to commercial banks? Because these are actually the ones that have the most power over. Yes. Why is that better than a tech company?
Yes, yes. Again, we can discuss the downside, but we're not going to do that. I'm so sorry. When we were talking to Andreas about this, I think one time he held an event and asked for questions, and I think he received 1,000 questions. So people are really intrigued by this, and we have a long list here, and I do want to give them a break also. There's a question here from Ray. Why does mining of Bitcoins requires so much energy? And the question that I can add, see if we can add more to that question, is that it's not, I know Bitcoin has now become a sort of not a major player, or not, I shouldn't say not a major, it's not as the leading light as it was when it was initially developed. And Ethereum, the one that from Canada, is in fact the thing that everybody's excited about. But apparently this energy problem is still a problem as a whole with these coins, these cryptocurrencies. And the impression you get, you think it's the minor stuff, but to tell you that to mine these things, the amount of electricity that you use, the modern, sophisticated modern state of Holland, they use as much or more to mine these coins. So the question is, why does the mining require so much energy?
Well, so the long answer. I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not giving a short answer, right? So I'm
That's all right.
I'm a professor. I'm used to talking. So, and unless I'm going to be Adebola may silence me at some point. But so the way the process works essentially is this: the whole idea of the creation of the registration, if you want, of a transfer requires the competition of a large number of computers, if you want, to determine who's allowed to be doing that. Now, in order to keep this secure, this process has to assign one person to do this at random. Now, the process that the Bitcoin blockchain chose, which is at that point technologically was the easiest, was to say, well, here's a particular problem that you have to solve. And it can only be solved by random guesses. So you can see when you have random guesses to solve a problem, it's the outcome who wins it is random. However, conditional on the computing resources that you supply in making these guesses. So if you can make more guesses, you're more likely to win the ability to produce a block. So to register a new transaction, and you get rewarded for doing that. Okay, so you therefore commit computing resources to make these guesses. Now, these guesses or these computers need to be powered by electricity. And that's precisely why they use so much electricity, because there's a lot of entities they're trying to compete. And as they compete, they use the computing, they use the electricity for it. And therefore, Bitcoin now uses something like 97 terawatt hours per year, which, by the way, I should say this, though, is still much less than what we actually use for the production of gold, which is equally useless, if you ask me. Now, again, going back to Ethereum and going back to modern blockchains, the Ethereum network was very clear from its get-go that they are aware of the environmental problem that they create with this energy consumption and that they want to move to a different system. The hope is that by the end of this year, although I'm not going to hold my breath, they will have two parts of a blockchain that are being merged so that over time, slowly, they will reduce this dependency on this particular stinky protocol so that the energy consumption of the entire network is not so much as a small country, but more like a small village.
I see. All right. Well, that's really intriguing. I know I've read also that they have somehow begun to order the administration of it a little bit. I've forgotten the name of the process, but just to change the process the way in which transactions are verified so that that process allows not to use as much computing power and is more distributive. I don't know. I think.
Correct. Yeah. So this is the proof of stake approach.
Yes, proof of stake.
There's still some questions. There's still some open questions about it from a scientific perspective, I can say. But that's the goal of that, is to move precisely into that sphere. So that process does not require, I mean, it does require a little bit of energy, but it's tiny, right? It's like your smartphone uses more.
All right. Now the next question here, it seemed a little bit political, but this is the question. I'll read it out to you. I think the question had to do with maybe the concerns that was mentioned not only by you, but by other informed observer with allowing Facebook or Amazon to begin that kind of payment where they almost have their own currency and all that kind of problem. And this person, Nick, I say, hasn't Apple already done that on Apple Play, demonstrating digital rights to a copy? I think that is what they meant. I'm not sure.
This was in the context of the discussion around, what were they called? NFTs?
NFTs?
Yeah.
Okay. So that actually had to do with that part of it. So are you aware that that is where we are, the NFT with that, the non-fungible tokens, with essentially Apple has arrived to that place before us, essentially, like it's done so many other things?
So I'm sure there's multiple different ways how you can register digital rights and digital uniqueness and maintain ownership or maintain a record of an ownership of something. So there's no question about it. This is not an innovation. This is not a new idea by all means, right? The difference is that it is kept in this decentralized network as opposed to under Apple's control effectively. So I think that this is really important to understand and I think to appreciate of why we should be worried about this. And I want to be very clear, I would be equally worried about, and I find actually central bank digital currencies and central bank operated or government operated networks are an equally large concern to people's freedom and our general future as a people. I think that there's major concerns that I have about this. I mean, so essentially what you have, anytime you have these networks, you would be able to see transactions of everybody. At the moment, I have an out, right? I can use cash. I don't have to have somebody look over my shoulder. Imagine every single transaction that you do will be visible. And we all know what's going to happen, right? We can get overzealous civil servants, bless them, go after the kid that has a lemonade stand and say, well, you have to pay sales tax on your lemonade sales. I mean, this is essentially what we're looking at. We're not looking at somebody going after big corporations that steal your money and that launder, that don't pay their taxes. We're talking about going after people for random reasons because people have a power rush. So unless governments are extremely constraining themselves in this process, we could enter into a totally dystopian nightmare where, just think about any authoritarian government could get the idea and say, well, you cannot give money to any opposition, which is already happening in countries such as, in the East, very far in the East.
Yes.
That could happen to you too. Right, so just don't kid yourself. This can happen to any country, right?
Yes.
It's scary, and so I think unless you set it up by design to give people an enormous amount of freedom and privacy, which is in the current world really hard to envision that that's actually what's going to happen. We're going to end up in a really bad outcome, really bad, right? So with the current view of everything has to be, we have to have anti-money laundering. It's the biggest problem in the world. We have to worry about that one. It's not true, right? The US is a good example of cutting off citizens from other countries because, other countries are very cash-based and they're worried about, money laundering from cash and to drugs and so on and so forth. That makes it impossible for people to do business with certain countries and certain banks in certain countries. Imposes huge hardship on people just for the idea that there could be some drug lord who does some money laundering there. I'm not saying that that's not a problem, but I think the extent to which we use the financial system to impose harm on people without actually realizing is astronomical. We do all do this on a daily basis. We're all part of it. Now, at the same time, having a corporation in charge of our money, or a small set of corporations dealing with this, is equally scary, right? I mean, YouTube cancels people's monetized channels on a whim. Facebook cancels people's accounts because they can. It's use their platform. But what if you become systemically important and you rely on it? That's a really scary prospect. So I'm just saying there's if you think it through, right, and you can rail about also these blockchains being used for for fraud, and you can say, well, they also used by criminals and so on and so forth. But if you take do you really believe, if you look at the countries in the world, and many countries will have some of these these kind of payment networks, how many countries do you actually ultimately trust persistently to not screw their own citizens at whenever it suits them? I think this list is pretty much zero. So I'm sorry. I mean, I have very high trust in my institutions, but there's limits, right? So there's bounds, and I think you need to have the bounds. And I think therefore this idea of having a totally decentralized world where nobody has control is by far more appealing to me. So.
Okay, well, that then brings us, maybe, I know there's still some questions, but since you are now talking about some of the risk, the downside, what about the security of blockchain. There's the way when you listen to the enthusiasts, the way they talk about it is almost as unbroken. You cannot break the code. It's so secure. And I think I read someplace where somebody referred to as military grade security, cryptography, and all that kind of stuff. And yet, there's been some significant intrusions with bad actors, powerful programmers, and all those kinds of stuff that have gotten into it. So the way the Economist put it is that nobody has ever written a computer program where there have not been some kind of, it's never been perfect. There's always been some weakness, and somebody figures out how to deal with that weakness. So can you tell us about blockchain and security? How do we go about dealing with that?
Okay, so a few facts are important. So the Bitcoin blockchain has been around since 2009, and nothing has been stolen off the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, Bitcoins have been stolen, but when they have been stolen, it was always on the service providers' platforms that took people's Bitcoins into custody. So it's actually, nothing has been stolen off the chain itself. The same applies to Ethereum. So in that sense, they've been around for a while, and people do try to hack it permanently. So they actually do their own attacks just as experiments to see, can we crack it? And no, they haven't been. So that's number one. Number two, the cryptography that is used for Bitcoin and Ethereum is entirely standard. It's been around for decades. And so there's nothing particularly fancy about it. This is also important, and nothing proprietary and nothing, super special about it. It's actually just the way it's set up. It's just, it seems to work. At the same time, so these are just simple facts. At the same time, we don't know what the future brings, right? So, it's at the moment, it's a toy which runs somewhere on the side. Nothing really important happens there. If this actually would be something would be systematically important, I'm not so sure if there what the security standard there could be. Could a country attack the usage of this blockchain, for instance? How would that work? What would it cost them to do it? It's not clear to me. So, and I don't know the answer, and I'm not the right person to actually answer that question itself.
Okay.
All I want to say is it's important to have the facts straight, right? So and I don't want to say that you don't get your facts straight, but yeah. The money that has been stolen has always been stolen from external service providers.
Okay. All right. One of the things here, again, I will read a little bit from the Economist here. So yeah, DeFi also raises question because you keep referring to that, the decentralized network. Yet DeFi also raises questions about how a virtual economy with its own norms interact with the real world. One worry is the lack of an external anchor of value, which is what I suspect. I mean, that was what was troubling me. I'm still wondering, what is it? What is it? Just a sophisticated game that is being played? And then cryptocurrencies are no different from the dollar in that they rely on people having a shared expectation of their utility. However, conventional money is also backed by states with a monopoly of force and central banks that are lenders of last resort. Without these, DeFi will be vulnerable to panics. Contract enforcement outside the virtual world is also a concern. A blockchain contract may say you own a house, but only the police can enforce an eviction. What do you have to say about that? I mean, those are pretty substantial concerns about the DeFi world.
Yeah, no, I mean, everything, I'm not sure who said it, but it's all valid, right? So to be very clear, what enabled the DeFi world to work and what is actually powers the interaction is that there are about $100 billion worth of digital representations of the US dollar available on it, right? So, and literally every transaction that happens in the DeFi world, irrespective of the fact that there's cryptocurrencies out there, it's all denominated in US dollars. In fact, actually, I can use DeFi to get a US dollar loan. Just be clear about that one.
Okay.
Now, for those of you who read the New York Times article this morning about the regulation, this is essentially where the regulators start cracking down on it, because there's two major service providers, both in the US, that actually provide these digital representations of the US dollar. And there's some concerns around that, let's say, right? Some real world concerns about that. But going back to the point, what powers the DeFi network and what actually allows it to work as well as it does is the fact that there are digital representations of the US dollar. Take that away, I don't think it would work as well. Now, mind you, other countries also recognize this. So to the best of our knowledge, for instance, China is actually developing also an approach where you can have digital representation of the yuan or the renminbi.
Oh, yes, they have already developed it and distributed it amongst 500,000 of the citizens.
Yeah, that's a little different. If I may interrupt you there, Donald. So that's actually the central bank's digital currency that they currently run as a pilot in a province. What I mean is that they actually also, in the Shanghai free trade zone, there's now a movement to develop the equivalent of digital representation that runs on a blockchain, on a decentralized blockchain, to actually facilitate some trade. So what I'm trying to say is there's actually some vision out there that you can use this technology to facilitate also your economic goals. The enforcement, you're absolutely right. The enforcement of digital contracts are running by code, but as you say, the getting somebody out of the house can only be done by the police. I agree, and I think the long-term survival, or not survival, but the long-term relevance of this space will really depend on whether or not there's a real-world link is being created. For that, you need a legal framework and so on and so forth. It doesn't, at the moment, exist is essentially in a vacuum. But of course, in the future, there could be something different. It's not that it runs without the physical world, but that's not a problem. I think this is the next opportunity. This is the thing to think about. Is this actually something that we believe could be leveraged to create something good, right? So let's not see everything as a threat just because it's new and different. Let's see it all.
Yes,
right?
yes.
This is great. It's a phenomenal technology. The fact that I find that it's, if you take a step back and say, forget about the regulators, right? Forget about all of that. Can we actually create something great out of this? I think we can, right? And without the dystopian concerns that I have when it comes to Facebook and even governments creating their own digital money. So.
Yes. All right. Well, I think, Andreas, this brings us really beyond the time I was supposed to stop, about 2 minutes beyond that time. But this just shows the not only the complexity, but there's so much to be known about this. I really do believe, I don't know what you did with that 1,000 questions that people in Canada sent to you and how long you got. I mean, did you talk for 10 hours? I do not know that, but I believe that we could have easily exhausted. I did not go through all the questions here. Like I said, I got 22 or so, and I was only able to go to one or two or three of those questions. So this is quite a subject matter that maybe Larry, we may have to have him back. I don't know. So, but Larry, I turn this over to you now.
Well, thank you, Donald, and thank you, Andreas, for sharing your evening with us from Toronto and for your insights into blockchain and cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. I'm sure you didn't answer everyone's questions, but perhaps you've given us some vocabulary to ask our own questions and look a little bit further. I think you've made the concepts a little easier for us to understand and helped us see how this technology might affect us in the coming years. Gave us some new things to think about there. So thank you very much. This is really interesting, and I have a number of questions still that I'd like to answer, and so I may have to visit you in Toronto to get at them.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really grateful for you to have me. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I very much, as you can tell, hopefully, I very much enjoy talking about it. Yeah. Even if I'm very verbose. So.
Well, okay. Now, please mark your calendar for our next Distinguished Speaker program, which is on Thursday, October 28th, when we're presenting a special program on the future of Afghanistan and Afghanistan's lost generation, if you would. We're going to look through the eyes of a panel of recent refugees and the future of the young people who were educated over the past 20 years with U.S. assistance. They'll be young professionals who had prepared themselves for a very different career path and a different life than what's presently available in Afghanistan. They certainly didn't plan to start their life over again as refugees in a new country. So it's going to be, I think it's a very, from going to something quite technical to something very human that I think that you'll enjoy and will learn a lot from. These young Afghanis come to us by way of the personal connections and contacts of two of our board members, Ken Holland, who is President Emeritus of the American University of Afghanistan, and Betty Tansing, who is former Fulbright Scholar and University Professor at the American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan, where several of these young Afghans were studying on open society fellowships. Both of them have been involved in getting people that they knew out of Afghanistan. Some of them are coming here, will be here by the time. Some of them are still in transition centers in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Qatar, et cetera. So I think it's a must-see program with insights that you won't be able to get anywhere else. You'll receive more information about the panelists and the opportunity to register within the next week. And you can find more information about all of our programs on our Indiana Council on World Affairs website at indianaworld.org. So for now, on behalf of our ICWA and our board of directors, we once more thank our distinguished speaker, Professor Andreas Park, as well as our discussion leader, Donald Cassell. I want to thank Adebola Ogundipe, not only for being our technical host, but for her service for this last year as our intern, and all of you who joined us for this evening. Professor Park, do you have a final word of farewell for the group?
Well, just thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors. Thank you.
Great,
Greetings
thank
from
you.
Toronto.
On behalf of my fellow board members and myself, I wish you a good evening and hope to see you all again next month to discuss the future of Afghanistan and that lost generation. Good night, all. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. And thank you, Donald.